program entitled Managing Head Lice in Schools. This webinar is produced by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Center of Expertise for School Integrated Pest Management. First, we would like to thank you all for attending today's webinar. This is Dr. Marcia Anderson with the Center of Expertise for School IPM located in Dallas, Texas. I have the great pleasure of being your moderator during today's program. This webinar is part of an ongoing series intended to educate those working in schools and in school-related positions about the importance of integrated pest management, or IPM, to student health and the steps that you can take to begin or improve the IPM program in your school. Every school has a pest walk, fly, or hitchhike in at one time or another. Today's webinar will discuss how to look for and manage head lice, the tiniest of pests, because they spread throughout your school. We'll be sharing best management practices for head lice endorsed by the American Pediatric Physicians Association and the National Association of School Nurses. Our focus will be on managing this persistent pest using an integrated pest management approach. But what exactly is integrated pest management? Well, before we introduce today's speakers, I'd like to take just a few minutes to review and highlight the importance of IPM. More than 53 million children and 6 million adults in this country spend a significant portion of their day in more than 120,000 public and private schools. Integrated pest management reduces exposure to pests, reduces unnecessary pesticide use, and reduces pest complaints. IPM is also cost-effective. IPM is a sustainable approach to managing pests since it combines biological, cultural, physical, and chemical tools in a way that minimizes economic, health, and environmental risks. IPM provides an opportunity to create a safer and healthier learning environment by helping to manage pests and reducing children's unnecessary exposure to pesticides. It has also been shown that a good IPM program can improve indoor air quality and reduce asthma triggers, thus improving school attendance. An effective school IPM program uses common sense strategies to reduce sources of food, water, and shelter for pests in school buildings and on school grounds. IPM is a smarter, usually less costly option for effective pest management, not only in schools, but in any setting. IPM programs take advantage of all pest management strategies, including monitoring, exclusion, sanitation, maintenance, physical and mechanical controls, and the judicious use of pesticides. Here's the IPM pyramid. Note that education and communication provide its foundation. People are often the reason that we have pests, so everyone in the school community can do things to help prevent or reduce pests. We like to say that IPM is as much people management as it is pest management. Next, cultural and sanitation practices include keeping your building and grounds clean and free of debris that attract pests. This is especially important for areas like dumpsters, recycling areas, and storage closets. Some examples of physical and mechanical control include keeping all possible entry points sealed, such as gaps under doors, around pipes, and wire entry points and gaps in foundations and roofs. There is typically less need for pesticides in an IPM program because doing the practices in the bottom tiers of the pyramid mean that you will have less pests with which to contend. IPM does require an initial investment in things like sealing up access locations, reducing pest access to refuse or food sources, and staff training. This is why it's a long-term process. It takes time to seal out pests and train people. Ultimately, exclusion does reduce pests and pest-related complaints. Once staff are trained, they learn to spot pests and pest-conducive conditions, so while going about their everyday tasks. So do what you're already doing and just think pests. Now you ask, how does head lice management relate to the key concepts of IPM in schools? Well, remember the IPM pyramid. Education and communication are the foundation of the pyramid and are essential to controlling the head lice problem and avoiding hysteria. Inspection and monitoring for head lice and pest-conducive conditions are the next IPM steps. Teach students to prevent and avoid these pests through exclusion and good sanitary practices. Today, we will also cover treatment procedures for when incidents do occur and how parents should be involved. IPM focuses on minimizing the impact of pests on human health. If you have good education, exclusion tactics, sanitation monitoring, and identifying protocols, you will have fewer pests. School nurses, facility managers, custodians, teachers, students, principals, and pest management professionals all have roles to play. So what are the benefits of following an IPM approach for all school pests? IPM is smart because it reduces the root cause of pest problems. The IPM approach manages pests by combining education and cultural tools, followed by additional physical and chemical tools in a way that minimizes health and environmental risks. An effective school IPM program is sensible because it provides an opportunity to create a safer and healthier learning environment by helping to manage pests and reduce children's exposure to pesticides. And IPM is a sustainable approach because it provides better long-term control of pests by reducing sources of food, water, and shelter for pests in schools. So our presenters for today include Dr. Richard Pollack. He's the Senior Environmental Public Health Officer at Harvard University and a public health entomologist serving academia and government at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. He is also the Chief Scientific Officer operating Identify Us, a consulting firm. He has traveled the globe to study, teach about, and guide policy issues relevant to medically relevant pests such as mosquitoes, lice, ticks, bedbugs, and the microbes that they transmit. When not in the lab or field, he is often embroiled in efforts to base policy decisions on evidence rather than folklore and fear. Next, we will have Nicole Bobo. She's Director of Nursing Education at the National Association of School Nurses. She has provided oversight for NASN's head lice program since 2012, including the industry-funded Lice Lessons and Head First Lice Lessons education initiatives. She was previously on faculty of the University of Louisville, Kentucky, and Regis University in Denver, Colorado. She has 25 years of clinical nursing experience in the acute and community setting and as an adult nurse practitioner. And then we will have Deborah Pontias. She's Health Services Coordinator and Chief of School Nursing in Pershing County, Nevada School District. She's the only school nurse covering all 4 schools in her district. Deborah is both a clinician with daily care for all students and the Health Services Administrator developing policy and procedure, including petitioning school board for revision in its current no-knit and no live lice policy for an evidence-based policy on lice management in 2011. She is on the National Board for Certification of School Nurses and is the author of numerous pediculosis journal articles. Okay. At this point, I would now like to invite Dr. Richard Pollack to discuss the clinical significance.
Marcia?
Yes?
Rich Pollack here. I'm sorry to break in. I've lost the connection several minutes ago from my computer, so I can go through the slides from my laptop, but you'll have to advance them.
I will do that. Okay. So, Dr. Pollack, this audience is itching to hear what you have to say, so take it away.
Okay. My apologies to everybody for the delay. Everything was working until just a moment ago. So, without further ado, well, good day, and thank you for the invitation and opportunity to present this webinar on managing head lice in schools. First, A little housekeeping. During this presentation, I may show images or mention names of products. This is for illustrative purposes. I do not endorse any product or service, and I have no conflicts of interest. Please proceed to the next slide. My comments today will be specific to head lice. Human beings also may host body lice and pubic lice, but you'll likely never encounter these on a student in a primary school in the U.S. If you do, please contact me to discuss those issues. I'll now offer insights on the biology and epidemiology of head lice. We'll try to dispel some commonly held myths. We'll review the medical and public health significance of these beasts, and we'll offer a review of management options. I hope these insights will be of use to school administrators, medical personnel, teachers, and parents. Next slide. Parents and school personnel tend to fear head lice far more than other maladies, yet head lice pose the least risk to life and limb than do the other creatures and conditions listed on this slide. Fear and misinformation trump reality. I'm hopeful that today's presentation will serve as a reality check and help many in this audience to reconsider the bases of their long-held beliefs. Next slide. A few children in virtually every elementary school will host head lice each year. As long as kids have scalp hair, some will acquire and host head lice. Next slide. The notion of head lice running rampant in the school corridors too often results in panic, consternation, and rage amongst parents and school personnel. Next. And of all the controversies that they deal with, few issues reduce the tenures or lives of school superintendents than those pertaining to head lice. Let's explore whether any of this concern is justified. Next. Myths about head lice are far more varied and prevalent than are the lice themselves. For instance, many people still wrongly believe that head lice are a sign that a person or his or her home is unclean. Head lice occur on persons who bathe every day and on those who do so much less often. Other common myths are that head lice can jump or fly, or that they can survive for days or weeks on floors, desks, beds, classrooms, or in cars or buses. This is simply not true. Yet more myths are that head lice are readily shared on combs and hats, burrow into the skin or transmit infections, are able to survive all treatments, and are a public health problem that should cause children to be sent home from school. None of these notions is true. Next. Head lice are insects. Their 6 legs each bear a strong claw well adapted for grasping scalp hair. Head lice are blood-feeding external parasites of people. They neither feed nor survive on any other animal. They are far more prevalent on children in the kindergarten through 4th grade levels than on those in other age groups. Head lice feed solely on blood. They do not and cannot burrow into the skin. The adult female louse affixes her eggs, often called nits, one at a time, onto the scalp hair, and almost invariably within just a few millimeters of the scalp. These eggs develop in about 9 days, and a tiny hatchling may then emerge from each egg. The young head louse will feed several times each day and grow to become an adult louse about 9 days later. Only then can it mate and begin another round of egg laying. If removed from a person, head lice quickly starve and desiccate. Many will die within hours, and all certainly by the next day. Next. If the female louse had mated, her eggs will develop during the next 9 days or so, and a single nymph will emerge from each egg. The developmental rate of the egg and of the emerged nymph is fairly constant because the temperature of the scalp varies little regardless of where a person lives or the season of the year. If a female had not mated, she will still deposit eggs, but these will not develop. Any egg older than 12 days likely has not been fertilized, contains a dead embryo, or has already hatched. Such old eggs are merely relics. Because of the stability of the cement, Dead and hatched louse eggs may remain on the hair for weeks, months, or even years. Hair grows from the base outwards, and these relics are then carried away from the scalp with the growing hair. Louse eggs discovered 1 centimeter or more from the scalp have almost certainly been attached for a month or more already, and these are not indicative of an active infestation. Living, that is crawling lice, or louse eggs within a few millimeters of the scalp satisfy the case definition. In a few cases, vigorous combing may loosen the glue from the hair and displace a viable egg to a position further away from the scalp. An expert can use a microscope to judge whether an egg is developing, has hatched, or has died. Those eggs that have hatched or died can never produce another louse. Next. A diverse menagerie of insects and ticks may be discovered on the scalp hair, and these are often mistakenly assumed to be head lice. Whereas springtails and book lice may frequently wander upon a person, they neither bite nor infest. Other times, fleas and ticks are found, and these can be far more irritating and pose considerably greater risk than do head lice. It is advised that any creatures discovered be sampled and examined with a hand lens or microscope so that they may be compared with the images we provide on our website. Proper identification and diagnosis can help ensure one selects the most appropriate treatment. Next. The overdiagnosis of head lice is the rule, not the exception. This leads to a troubling amount of unnecessary treatment and other efforts that result in more harm to children and burden to schools and parents. I published findings on this phenomenon in medical literature 15 years ago. Sadly, the majority of kids presumed to be infested by head lice are wrongly labeled as lousy, the correct technical term for those who host lice. Next. How prevalent are head lice? The most often repeated statistic claims that there are 6 to 12 million cases of head lice per year in the U.S. Being that the vast majority of cases occur on kids in the kindergarten through 4th grade levels, that would mean that 1/4 to 1/2 of the kids in this group would be expected to acquire lice each year. But there is absolutely no basis for this claim. It seems to derive from a grossly extrapolated estimate based on flawed marketing survey. The true prevalence of head louse infestations amongst 5 to 10-year-old children is about 1%. That's about 1 infested kid in every 4 to 5 classrooms. Occasionally, prevalence will be greater, but often it is lower. I've examined more than 10,000 kids for head lice and screened the entire populations of many schools that were said to be experiencing a head louse epidemic. Each such outbreak was imagined. That is, the vast majority of presumably infested kids have been mistakenly labeled as such. Next. School nurses tend to correctly spot evidence of a head louse infestation far better than do other folks. Even then, only about 70% of the items they believe represent a louse infestation are truly of louse origin. To make matters worse, in fewer than half of these cases, the objects were merely relics of long extinct infestations. I can't think of any other medical test that would be accepted with such dismal statistics. So why is it okay for head lice? School nurses regularly confuse dead and hatched eggs and yet other diverse kinds of scalp debris as evidence of an active infestation. In reality, you could flip a coin as the sole basis for diagnosis and be right far more often than if a school nurse performs the task. When teachers, parents, and others make the call, the rate of misdiagnosis dramatically worsens. That's a very troubling problem. Next. We've all heard that we shouldn't share hair combs, brushes, headphones, helmets, and other such objects because they might spread head lice. But this long-held belief is yet another myth because head lice cannot easily grasp such items. Furthermore, head lice do not survive long once removed from a person. Indeed, they tend to die within just a few hours from water loss and starvation. Hence, fomites are of no significance in the transfer of head lice. Next, Look at the size of a louse on a standard plastic comb. There's no way a louse could possibly grasp any part of a comb. Yet, as children, we've all been taught that combs and other such objects are not to be shared, lest we risk acquiring lice. There may be other reasons not to share combs, but we shouldn't blame lice. Next. Helmets, whether for biking, batting, or other uses, save many lives and reduce the frequency and extent of trauma. Don't shared helmets transmit head lice? There's no evidence that they do. Nonetheless, many parents are so fearful of lice that they'll insist that their child not don a helmet that others have used. How can such concerns be alleviated? Some will listen to reason. For others, they might purchase a helmet specific for their own child. Alternatively, shared helmets can be quickly wiped out with a clean, damp rag to further reduce the tiny risk that a louse or a louse egg might be inside. A non-woven hair cover, similar to those used by some workers in the food service industries or medical facilities, may be worn beneath the helmet. This is probably silly and fiscally wasteful, but if it helps kids wear helmets, then so be it. The lousiest and most dangerous helmet is one that is not used. So protect the kids from real hazards. Make sure they wear helmets and that they're sized and fitted properly. Next. Head lice are most likely transferred when one infested person's scalp hair is in direct and prolonged contact with that of another, such as when children might share a bed or simply play or read together. This provides opportunities for lice to wander onto the scalp hair of another person. Parents might acquire or contribute head lice when they hug their children. That's a small price to pay for wholesome behavior. If one family member is infested, then all others in the home should be checked. The only treatment necessary should be directed to the hair, and then only if living or crawling head lice are present. Next, when head lice are actually present, they're usually few and far between. Typically, a child with head lice has just 10 or fewer live lice present at any time. Rarely a child may be endowed with a thriving population of many dozens or even 100 or more. Dozens or hundreds of eggs may be present, but the vast majority of those eggs won't be viable. That is, they've hatched long ago, never developed, or contain a dead embryo. Most children with head lice are at peace with their lice. Generally, the lice don't cause much itching or irritation. When that happens, the itching is usually transient and mild. Head lice do not transmit infections, but any kind of bite or wound, be it from a mosquito, flea, or louse bite, may become secondarily infected when scratched with dirty fingernails. Next. Caregivers may spend a few dollars to treat a case, or they may expend far more than $1,000. With few exceptions, those who have spent the greatest amounts tend to have wrongly assumed that they, or their children, had lice in the first place. Children presumed to have head lice are further burdened because many are forced by unwise policies to lose time from school. Sometimes this lost time causes the student to have to repeat the grade. Next. So, what might be a realistic practice should a child be presumed to have head lice? Let's say a child is seen scratching his or her scalp. The child's parent, and perhaps the school nurse, but never anyone else, might have a look. If nits are not found, then this should lead to an outbreak of smiles. But what if nits or nit-like objects are found? Take a deep breath and look for live, crawling lice. If any creature is found, compare it to images of lice or submit it to an independent expert for review. I provide images online at Identify Us and regularly assess digital images and specimens sent to me daily. Next. If live, that is crawling lice, are not found, then relax. There's no need to treat. Simply re-inspect again several days later. Should living head lice be discovered, there are three main strategies to eliminate them from a person. The lice and their eggs can be mechanically removed by use of special combs and other implements and by carefully controlled heating and drying. Louse infestations can be treated with medicated lotions and shampoos. Finally, one can remove the scalp hair entirely. Head lice cannot remain on a hairless scalp, but shaving the head as a treatment or preventative measure is almost never justified, and it tends to cause far more problems than it solves. Next. If the hair is readily combed with a good louse comb, then this may be a reasonable option. The shorter and straighter the hair, the greater the likelihood of success. Use a cheap conditioner to help lubricate the hair, then wash that out. If the hair is not readily combed, consider treating. Read, understand, and follow the package instructions. Do not treat, just in case. A more complete flowchart for managing head lice in schools is freely available at my website at identify.us.com. Next. Many special devices are sold to help remove lice and eggs. If the hair is tangled, combing will be difficult, impractical, and may be painful. In those cases, the caregivers might consider treating instead, or as a supplement to combing. Next. An array of over-the-counter anti-louse remedies is available in any pharmacy and even in supermarkets. Select products that are FDA registered and follow the directions on the package. Most of these are formulated with pyrethrins, natural extracts of chrysanthemum flowers, or pyrethroids, they're synthetic analogs. These products are inexpensive, easy to use, pose almost no risk to a person when used properly, and they're sometimes effective. Generally, 2 treatments are necessary, spaced about 10 days apart. Increasingly, head lice are resistant to these products. I'll speak more about that momentarily. Some other over-the-counter formulations are available that work by other means to help eliminate lice. Next. The media have had a field day recently reporting on so-called super lice in their spread throughout the nation. Viewers of these reports might then assume that lice wear tights and little capes and can leap tall buildings. They might also assume that these lice are bigger, stronger, or are able to survive any and all treatments. None of these is true, of course. Some head lice have indeed become resistant to certain kinds of treatments, but not to all. This means that some lice are still susceptible to the over-the-counter treatments. You can't look at a louse and know whether it'll die or not when exposed to a product. The caregiver might very well experience success by using one of the over-the-counter products. Next. The notion of resistance by head lice to the standard treatments is nothing new. I published findings on this issue more than 15 years ago. The recent findings are certainly interesting, but they shouldn't be surprising or cause alarm. Next. Should head lice survive the proper use of over-the-counter remedies, the caregiver might consult the family pediatrician. Several prescription anti-louse products are available. Each of these contain markedly unrelated active ingredients that function quite differently. They're not necessarily stronger or better, but they will likely help eliminate lice. Why not simply reach for these first? They each require a visit to a prescriber and then the pharmacy. Compared with the $10 or so purchase price for the over-the-counter products, these prescription products may cost $150 or more. Next. Some of these products, such as those contained within the red box on this slide, can potentially pose greater risk if misused. The likelihood of an adverse event from their proper use, however, would be quite tiny. Lindane, a chlorinated hydrocarbon insecticide, was a mainstay treatment for decades. The product is still registered as a topical treatment for lice and scabies. For head lice, the treatment is applied to the scalp for 4 minutes, then is rinsed off. This minimizes exposure and chances of an adverse event. But the product may contaminate wastewater streams to levels that exceed regulatory limits. Hence, Lindane has been banned for most uses in some states. The product also carries a black box warning that reads, "Warnings, Lindane shampoo should only be used in patients who cannot tolerate or have failed first-line treatment with safer medications for the treatment of lice." Some resistance to lice by lice to Lindane has been reported. The other products contain malathion, an organophosphate insecticide, as the main ingredient. Malathion had been used as a louse remedy for many years, but was pulled from the market because of lagging sales. At the request of CDC, FDA reapproved its use in a new formulation. Whereas both of these products can be effective, many believe that the potential risks resulting from their misuse should dissuade their selection as a treatment option. Newer generation pesticides are generally thought to carry less risk to people. Next. Regardless of the concerns that some folks have regarding the risks of certain FDA-registered pesticides, the risks from the inappropriate use of many other products tend to be far greater. As an example, far too many people treat themselves or their children with gasoline, kerosene, or other flammable and unacceptably toxic products. In more than a few cases, an open flame or spark nearby was sufficient to ignite the product, resulting in serious burns. Why would anyone resort to such dangerous pursuits? In some instances, the kids or their caregivers felt compelled to treat because of school policies that denied access to presumably infested kids. To add insult to injury, some of these kids never had evidence of being infested in the first place. Next. In many communities, you can find folks who will be happy to spend time trying to comb out head lice and pick nits for a price. These salons seem to be spreading faster than do the lice themselves. Why not refer patients or parents to such facilities or allow these businesses to operate in the schools? Let's consider the reasons. This is an essentially unregulated industry. Those who offer these services will examine a person's scalp and proclaim them to be with lice or not. Although they tend to deny it, the purveyors of these services are essentially rendering a medical diagnosis, yet they rarely hold medical credentials. These folks will run combs through the hair and may cut out some presumably endowed hair, yet these folks are rarely licensed as barbers or beauticians. Finally, many formulate, sell, or apply anti-louse products, yet such products are rarely registered or approved by the FDA or EPA, and the salon personnel are rarely licensed as pest control professionals. Now, some of these folks may have a great track record in correctly identifying lice and be skilled in removing lice and nits. But how would any client know whether they're getting useful service or not? Most troubling is when these practitioners are invited into the school to ply their wares and services. From my perspective, if caregivers wish to patronize these businesses on their own time, then so be it. But these services should not be operating on school grounds, and kids should never be required to attend such a salon. Next. So, what should be pursued by school health officials? Sample the offending creature or object and ensure that it is properly identified. If the creature is a head louse, then return the child to the classroom and notify the child's caregiver at the end of the day. Provide objective educational information to help guide the caregiver's response. Next. School authorities should exercise restraint by not pursuing unjustified and counterproductive strategies. The student should not be excluded or isolated, and his or her identity should never be shared with anyone else. That includes teachers, parents of other kids, and even the principal. Unless they are medical professionals, it is rarely their business to know about a child's medical condition. Similarly, do not perform mass screenings. Those are wasteful and unwise witch hunts. Never apply pesticides to classrooms or buses because of head lice. Remember, head lice don't survive long off a person. Don't report families to youth or social services because of head lice, as those personnel will likely have nothing to offer. Do not bag clothing, and don't restrict use of headphones or helmets. Next. Unfortunately, some school administrators still enforce archaic no-nit policies. They assume these practices somehow reduce the incidence or prevalence of head lice, but there's no objective basis for such policies, and they lack any medical or public health justification. Those who examine kids in schools tend not to have the appropriate training, equipment, or legal basis to perform the task. Those who believe the policies are justified mistakenly assume that nits are likely to be viable and or are transmissible. They are not. Finally, the policies are burdensome to children, school personnel, and parents. Next. School health officials across the land have reassessed the bases of their practices, and the policies have been falling like a stack of dominoes. They've concluded that the past policies lacked objective justification, were inappropriate uses of school nurse or other personnel, and caused undue distress and unnecessary absence. A better goal would be to follow evidence-based practice. Isn't that a lesson we'd want to impress upon the kids? Next, the CDC offers good advice. Students diagnosed with head lice do not need to be sent home early from school. And as they state, the burden of necessary absenteeism outweighs the risks associated with head lice. Next, the American Academy of Pediatrics policy statement says that no healthy child should be excluded because of head lice or nits, and head lice screening programs have not been proven to be cost effective. Next, in the National Association of School Nurses, who we'll hear from momentarily, agrees with this, that infestation by head lice should not disrupt the educational process. Next, head lice are obligate human parasites. They are not free-living. Hence, they should be considered medical pests, not pests of the school, home, or other locations. School and pest management personnel rarely can do anything to prevent or eliminate head lice. Next, in this case, IPM efforts should be directed solely on the scalp hair. School personnel can, of course, offer educational resources. They can also ensure that no one other than a trained medical professional examines a child for head lice or any other parasite. Next, in summary, as long as kids have scalp hair, some will encounter and acquire head lice. But of all the infections or infestations a child may acquire from others, head lice are perhaps the least significant to health. Head lice have never killed or made anyone significantly ill. The presence of head lice suggests that a child has friends. If the child is not social, he or she will never likely have such an opportunity to bring home these little pests. So rather than being horrified that a child has head lice, a better response would be to smile, then proceed with rational efforts to battle this bug. Next, parents and school personnel who need more insight may find help from my online resources at Identify Us. We offer answers to frequently asked questions, provide flowcharts for guidance, and present images for comparison. Images of presumed lice and other pests can be uploaded or specimens sent for rapid, independent, confidential, and expert evaluation. I invite you to read position statements, insights, and guidance from objective sources, then to consider the extent to which your own programs and activities might be revised. Thanks very much for your attention. I'll enjoy fielding your questions during this session at any time thereafter. Just contact me via our discrete communications portal at identify.us.com. Thank you.
Well, I would like to thank Dr. Pollack for his extremely informative review of head lice, including information on their clinical importance, myths, diagnosis, treatments, and justified responses when they do appear on the heads of our school children. Thank you very much, Dr. Pollack. Now we will hear from Nicole Bobo, who will provide the National Association of School Nurses position on head lice, school nurse practice guidelines, and NASN resources. Nicole, please take it away.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you to share the perspective of NASN and the resources from NASN. So after my short time with you, I hope you will be able to identify the key components of NASN's position on the management of head lice in schools and describe the NASN tools and resources to support school nursing practice related to the management of head lice in schools. As the professional organization for the specialty practice of school nursing, NASN has a responsibility to its over 16,000 members and the public they serve to provide the guiding voice for practice. This is done, for example, through NASN's position statements that supplement the scope and standards of professional school nursing practice. In the 2011 NASN position statement, you will find outlined guidance for school nursing practice based on the evidence that Dr. Pollack just presented. So at the student or classroom level, it's NASN's position that managing head lice in school should not disrupt the educational process, as Dr. Pollack stated. When head lice are found, students should remain in class, head-to-head contact should be discouraged, and parents and caregivers should be contacted at the end of the school day to discuss treatment options. If there has been known head-to-head contact, it is appropriate to screen those individuals. That would include family members or other students. At the school level, again, it's based on what Dr. Pollack just presented. It's the position of NASM that no net policies should be abandoned. There should be no classroom-wide screenings, and school-wide letters should be educational, not an announcement that a case of head lice has been found. And I just want to point out that in January 2016, we anticipate an updated NASM position on head lice. So visit our website. Now, the framework for 21st century school nursing practice helps put NASM's position into action. Just as a quick overview, the framework was developed by NASM this past year, designed to reflect current-day evidence-based school nursing practice. The framework focuses on 5 key principles, which you can see here: standards of practice, care coordination, leadership, quality improvement, and public health. For each of these principles, which focus then on the outcome of students that are healthy, safe, and ready to learn, there are related practice components. I know this slide is very busy, but this does list the practice components related to each of the principles. And it was published in the July issue of NASM School Nurse, if anybody wants to look at it. Now, since unveiling this framework in June, we have been collecting feedback from multiple sources. And I want to give you a heads up that we anticipate the revised, finalized framework to be published in NASM School Nurse in January. So I just want to take a moment to show how using the framework guides the role of the school nurse in managing head lice in schools. For the principal care coordination, practice components would include collaborative communication with the student and family to reduce stigma and help keep students in class. Education would also be a practice component and would be outlining all the information that Dr. Pollack just went over, from the life cycle of the louse, dispelling the myths, and also encouraging and educating families on how to screen at home. And of course, direct care would be part of care coordination based on evidence-based strategies. For the principle of leadership, school nurses advocate for the student with school administration and other parents. And they are involved with policy development and implementation around the policies that Dr. Pollack outlined also, the no-knit policies and elimination of classroom-wide screenings. For the principle of quality improvement, school nurses are involved with ongoing evaluation to follow up on any cases of reinfestation, monitoring for resistance or lack of follow-through with treatment, and collecting meaningful health and academic outcomes. The principle of public health would include attention to environmental health, connecting with your public health colleagues to find out if there are resistant strains in your community would be an example of monitoring the environmental health. And again, health education, a key strategy of primary prevention to address this community issue that's coming into the schools. And finally, standards of practice. The foundation for the recommended role of the school nurse is rooted in evidence-based practice, and the NASM position statements can help with this. One additional comment about quality improvement happened in the results of the school health policies and practice study that just came out last week. I'm not sure if anybody in the audience saw this. This is data to follow, important data to follow and try to improve the quality of head lice programming in the schools. In this report, 80% of the schools that responded said that students were sent home for head lice. That is not the direction that we want to see head lice management programming going in the schools. So what are some of the resources that NASM has to support school nurses in their efforts to manage head lice in the schools? Well, I want to draw attention to our website. We have one web page devoted to head lice. On that web page, there are resource publications, for example, linking to the NASM position statements, national resources where Dr. Pollack's site is included, and there is a link to literature, both in the Journal of School Nursing and NASM School Nurse. Also on that website, there's a link to this education campaign, Head First Lice Lessons. It is an initiative between NASN and Sanofi Pasteur with the focus on helping school nurses reduce fear and stigma and help parents and caregivers navigate treatment options. Most of the resources are in English and Spanish. For example, there's a PowerPoint presentation that the school nurse could use at a PTO meeting to give an overview for parents, teachers, and the community. There's a conversation guide for school nurses answering most common questions. Head Lice 101 for the school nurse, as well as a Head Lice 101 for parents, up-to-date fact sheets. There is a guide for families facing head lice, step-by-step guide. And there are some sample letters home, both in English and Spanish, in PDF and Word format. One's general informational letter that would go out to the whole school community. And one would be, if there was evidence of head lice, a letter that could go home to the parent. And soon there will be a new resource on this website, a poster that can be posted in the office. It's a collaborative between the American Academy of Pediatrics and NASN. At the bottom of that website, there's also a link to these resources, additional resources for families. The school nurse could direct the families to go to this. It's more user-friendly, lower health literacy level. It has topics such as what do head lice look like, what are the steps to treat head lice, facing head lice at school, and how to talk about head lice. In addition, there's an interactive Q&A and a video. Again, some user-friendly resources that the school nurse could steer parents and families to. There are other resources from NASN. On our website, there's a back-to-school toolkit with a link right to Head First Lice Lessons. There's an article on the home page, Don't Be Bugged by Head Lice as You Return Back to School. There's a recent NASN radio, Misconceptions About Head Lice, which actually Deb Pontius, who will be speaking next, she actually is the speaker on that radio show. And this summer, June, Dr. Shirley Gordon posted a blog educating ourselves about head lice in the schools. You can also see resources posted in our electronic weekly digest, articles in NASN School Nurse, and in the Journal of School Nursing. So to summarize NASN's position, we believe the school nurse is well positioned to take the lead in the elimination of exclusion policies and insisting that evidence-based practices, tapping into NASN resources, be incorporated in the schools to reduce stigma for both the student and family, keeping students in school and ready to learn. And I thank you for your time.
Well, Nicole, what a great review of the National Association of School Nurses' position on head lice. Thank you very much. Next, Deborah Pontius will be discussing her In the Trenches school nurse viewpoint of the challenges of dealing with head lice in her school district. She will also provide us with more on the role of the school nurse and the goals of the new lice policy and components of a model lice policy that you can adapt to your school. Deborah, the audience is all yours.
Thank you. And first of all, I want to apologize. Unfortunately, I've developed a sore throat with problems with my voice, but I will do my best to get through this. I'm very pleased to be here today to share the evidence and the process that I used myself in changing my policy in my school district. It's unfortunate, as Nicole just spoke to, that 80% of the respondents to their recent survey indicate that they still send students home for live lice. We do know that lice policies are changing every day, but unfortunately not very quickly. I changed my policy in 2008 and again in 2011. In 2008, I eliminated no-nit policies, and then in 2011, I changed the policy to allow live lice and to make sure that we eliminated classroom screenings. And the most important thing that I want to say is since that time, there has been absolutely no change in the incidence or the numbers or the amount of lice in school. So it's very easy for me to say to my school board that eliminating a nit-free policy, having live lice in school, having nits in school has made absolutely no difference in transmission. So the goals and the challenges that we deal with in school are based around myths and fear. Dr. Pollock talked about some of the factual myths and inaccuracies that parents, teachers, and community members hold on to. They fear lice because of a lack of understanding or a lack of willingness to understand the transmission and the life cycle of the louse. They fear that of their own embarrassment in the community and the stigma of the lice being that identified lice family if they get lice. And they hold strongly to the myth that if the lice child is isolated, their own children will be protected from a lice infestation. And they believe that they have a right to know who has lice in their community because somehow that knowledge will protect their child. Excuse me. Many of you might be thinking, wow, I really wish my district would change their lice policy. And I'm here to help you make the difference in the change. In my district and community, I'm the lice queen. And I never knew that that is not the goal that I plan to have in my life. However, that has been very helpful to me to do. Research says that school staff look primarily to school nurses and other health professionals, as Dr. Pollock mentioned. However, Dr. Google is rapidly replacing these healthcare professionals in their knowledge. It's much more likely that they're going to keyboard it in and find out some answers that may or may not be true, more likely not, on the internet than the healthcare professionals that also may or may not know what it is. Your role as a healthcare professional is to find the lice, to give accurate information on how to kill the lice, and to not harm the child by killing the lice or by inadvertently increasing bullying or embarrassment. Please don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Dr. Pollock spoke about the woman who was burned in an attempt to de-lice herself. In my own experience, I've had a mother that sprayed Raid on her children's heads. And I know almost every school nurse out there has had the shaved head experience, whether they're boys or girls. We want to keep the students in school. We want to teach everyone about the realities of lice, and we want to advocate to change policy based on evidence, not on fear or well-meaning common practice. You have the opportunity to make changes to lice policy in your school, because if you wait for administration, it may never happen. It's up to you to rattle the cages and bring forth the evidence for change, whether you're a school nurse, you're a physician or other healthcare provider, or just an interested community member. I did want to mention, especially because I'm having so much trouble talking today, that much of my content about changing policy can be found in my 2011 article, Hats Off to Success, and the 29 Anderson and McCarthy article, A Policy Change Strategy for Head Lice. Both are in the NASN School Nurse. Also a 2014 lice article in Pediatric Nursing that I wrote. And I really want to recognize Joan Edelstein and her pioneer work in Oakland in 2006, where she eliminated NIT-free policies. Without her in that large district, we would not have been able to go forward. So advocating for for evidence-based lice policies, the first thing is to leave it well enough alone. Some districts have completely eliminated any sort of policy, and there are a few that never had any. If you don't have a policy on lice management, don't start one. If we don't have a policy for managing a cold or a flu within the school environment, other than basic communicable disease, we shouldn't have one for lice, other than that ick factor, which is what drives everything. Unfortunately, that doesn't really happen in most communities, so the best we can do is create an appropriate policy. Start with the research to identify your policy components. And the most respected are the 4 that have already been discussed previously. And then gather your own statistics, because nothing is more powerful than home evidence when you're presenting to a school board. Jeff Hoopman mapped classrooms of infested students, and found all students in the same classroom with lice had outside time together, such as cousins, or they slept in the same household, the same bed, or there was a recent sleepover. So I did my own epidemiology. I started 2 years before I planned my change because I had been watching the research that was coming out. And I kept statistics about the number of lice cases, how many students with lice were in the same classroom, and how they were connected. And my results were exactly the same as Hootman's. In only 2 cases was the classroom the only common thread that I could find, and I'm still not sure that there wasn't something else. So do case finding on all your cases. Are they related? Were there sleepovers? Is there time outside of school with babysitters? And more common, is it going from one house to another between parents that are divorced and have different families? So identify the policy that you want to have, and even more importantly, a dissemination strategy for that revised policy and procedure. Anderson and McCarthy said that the plan must include identifying components of the existing policy that aren't supported by evidence and provide alternative guidelines that are, and also anticipating stakeholder concerns for change and developing resources that minimize barriers to change. So Dr. Pollack talked about this a little bit, but what's so wrong with no-net policies? Well, I want to reiterate a couple of things. They're based on erroneous ideas about transmission, primarily that non-viable nits are viable. I can see that little white nit, that person might have lice, and that's not true. Once they're cemented on, they're there until they're pulled out or the hair falls out. Or that lice are easily transmitted in school, and that's the one we need to, as schools, really need to deal with. They're not. One study found that no more than 10% of cases were transmitted in school. And since Dr. Pollack has already told us that the lice prevalence rate is about 1%, 10% of 1% is a pretty tiny number, certainly not one worth of exclusion. My favorite response to folks who insist on retaining no-net policies is from Dr. David Taplin. If no-net policies were that effective, why do we still have so many headlights? My response locally, when my families ask me, so is there an outbreak of head lice? Do we have a bunch of head lice again? My response is always, there's always head lice. It's just a matter of whether or not we see it. So looking at goals of our new lice policy, the things that we need to deal with are resistance. And teacher resistance is often worse than parental resistance. Parental resistance is generally, but not always, more common among highly engaged parents and in more affluent areas. And without adequate knowledge of the transmission cycle, quarantine makes perfect sense. You've got a problem, then isolate it. Except it doesn't work. We need to provide them with evidence-based guidelines and compare it, especially when we're talking to teachers, about the evidence-based guidelines that they use as a teacher. They can't teach using teaching principles unless they're based on evidence. And why should medical people do anything less? We should only be providing treatments that are based on evidence. Fear and emotion have always been stronger molders of behavior, much more motivating than facts. So that's what we've got to deal with, is the fear and the emotions. And then we fit the facts in around that. Families and teachers often panic and immediately scratch their heads when the topic comes up. This, again, comes from a number of fears and myths. And the ones that I found is that the day lice is found is the day that they were infested. The first day that that child could have possibly infested my child or another child because we found it today. In reality, they probably had it for 3 weeks or more. The other myth that lice are dangerous, and Dr. Pollack has explained that this is just not so. Lice are only dangerous if there's an extremely rare secondary infection, or if there are neurotoxic or dangerous chemicals used, especially if they don't need to. Dr. Pollack found that children without lice receive applications of over-the-counter particularicide products almost as often as children with lice. And children with presumed but without lice are excluded more often than children with actual lice. That tells us we need to change what we're doing. And can be true that treatment costs can be substantial. And I did want to mention, I'm sorry, my slides are a little behind here, but I did want to mention, I love this picture of a louse here, and I do have this on my desktop at school in a very large version. However, I do know that it is, Dr. Pollack, a body louse and not a head louse, but it's just too good to pass up, full of the blood there as an obligate parasite. So let's look at these, what an ideal school lice policy should contain. Dr. Pollack has given you the entomologic facts about lice and reviewed the research about transmission and the actual rates of discovery. As we translate that into policy change, conventional-based wisdom are the things that are on the left-hand side of the screen that have already been discussed in the past. And we've talked a little bit about the evidence ones on the right side, and we're going to look at those in just a little bit more detail. What I really want to say is that we're going to change the no-nit policy, or the no-nits concept, to some new no's. That is, no regular preventative screening, screen only the close contacts, no notification letters, no exclusions, and no nit-free requirements. One of our conventional wisdoms is that we should screen classmates of when there's a student found to have lice in school, in order to, or to do class-wide screenings on a regular basis in order to catch cases and eliminate lice in school and potential school transmission. And as I mentioned before, there's always lice in school. There's always lice everywhere, about 1% or so in elementary, maybe up to 5% in elementary, and about 1% in middle and high schools. And we know that they're not easily transmitted in school. Screening in the classroom takes time for prevention and does not provide case finding. I have two such families who are chronic head lice families. Someone in that family has always got head lice. No one in any classroom that those students have been in has gotten lice from those students, and they've been in those classrooms for years now. Screening doesn't prevent a child from getting lice. Screening only shows that I did not find a louse or a viable nit on the day that I checked. There might be one tomorrow. I'm not that great, although I look at a lot of lice. I miss some, and they run fast. And those little tiny black viable nits are very difficult to see on a primarily brunette population that I have. Doesn't mean that those louse aren't there, just that I didn't see them today. It provides a false sense of security to your child and that they're going to remain lice-free. No school nurse can do as good a job as a motivated parent. Teaching parents to provide screening of their own children is much better for them. They'll find it early and prevent transmission to other members in the family. So that evidence-based policy says we're going to screen those contacts we know by research are at most risk. Those are students at recent sleepovers, those that are very young who play together and often close together. You may want to screen a classroom of pre-K kids if you have a couple of identified cases or they have really long hair. But older classrooms, it doesn't make any sense. Maybe shared hair care items, and definitely those that share a bed. So what do we do first if we suspect that we find lice after we've looked at the child's head? Well, first, we're not really going to do anything. We're going to return the student to class. Do we notify the teacher? No. Notify parents or classmates? No. Notify the bus driver? No. Looking through our new evidence-based lens, remaining at school for another 2 to 6 hours or riding the bus home poses little risk to other children who've already been in that room or riding that bus with that student for up on to 2 or 3 weeks. Sending them home on the bus isn't going to increase the risk in any way. We need to help parents and staff understand that lice is a continuous, ongoing event in every community. No school is ever lice-free. I want to spend some time on confidentiality. The conventional wisdom is that we send home notes to the parents of schoolmates or classmates, those alert letters to check their children. But we know from that entomology and our lice and research that these kids have had lice for 2, 3, or more weeks before they're found. They didn't just catch it. Your child didn't automatically now become at risk because it's been identified. Letters can lead to unnecessary prophylactic treatment just in case. I see that all the time. And sending letters can cause unjustified panic about outbreaks, creating that false sense of security that the child is lice-free for the moment. Phew, I checked my child, they don't have lice, everything is good. When in fact they spent the night at a child's house last night, there was only one pregnant louse, and she's now leaving the eggs. Privacy obligations are huge. Infested students absolutely have a right to privacy and confidentiality under FERPA, the Fourth Amendment, and state laws. State and national standards require the healthcare professional to protect privacy and confidentiality, and that includes the school nurse. Failure to uphold that right can leave yourself open to unprofessional conduct challenges. Parents do not have a right to know another student has lice, or even the presence of lice in the school. If you're contemplating the disclosure of confidential health information, even by default, it must meet the criteria for duty to do no harm. Can the truth of the information be confirmed? Well, I can't diagnose. I have a pretty good suspicion, but I can't diagnose. I leave that to Dr. Pollack, looking under his microscope. How much more will the child and his or her privacy be violated by this disclosure? Will it cause them harm, especially if you're wrong? Duty to warn is limited to a few specific circumstances: child abuse, self-injury, or possible serious harm to another. Lice are annoying, but they're not dangerous, and an infestation does not rise to the level of duty to warn. Harm from social stigma is far greater to the family than the lice ever could be. Consider the HIV cases of the 90s. If districts can't inform parents that there's a case of HIV in the school, even without a student's name, then they certainly can't inform about lice. But some of you may be thinking, but what about non-student specific letters? I mean, we don't say who has the lice, just that there's a case in their classroom. Those don't break confidentiality. Really? How many questions does it take for a parent to ask their child to determine which child went home early today, or which one left and never came back? Or the child, which I run into, returns to class, gets their belongings, or even sits back down and says, "I've got lice." I practice proactive privacy in my schools. All students are called to the office. They're never called to the nurse's office. They have no idea, and that's whether it's for lice or whether I'm checking their eyes. They have no idea if they're in trouble with the principal, if they're getting an award. If I'm checking for lice, I'm checking for vision, or if they forgot their lunch and their mother just brought it to them. The school nurse focus needs to be on community education, not on exclusion and screenings. So notify the parents at the end of the day, either by phone call or in person if possible, to provide education. It's inappropriate to notify the bus driver or anyone else. And you want to use written materials to support your verbal interactions with them. I send the child back to class. The first thing you're going to do is nothing. Try to talk to the parents at the end of the school day in person if possible, but they're generally going to panic, want to grab the child and run. So I tend to do it the next day. Give them written materials. There should be graphics if possible, lots of white space. Use active voice and simple words. You need to check your nurse language at the door. For example, say check your child weekly, or the paperwork needs to say check your child weekly, instead of weekly checks should be performed. That is more simple language, and it's using active voice. NASN lice lessons that Nicole discussed are a good example of this. No net policies assume that eliminating every viable net or every visible net eliminates all lice, but the research tells us this doesn't work. Lice are not easily spread by nits. The nits are cemented on the hair shaft and they've got to be pulled off. Nits farther than a ½ inch are usually not viable and only need to be removed for cosmetic reduction, reducing possible stigma. Old dead nits, those are the ones most likely to be removed because there's the ones that are easy to see. So that doesn't change whether or not that child is going to show up with lice. Removal of nits is no guarantee that there's not tiny nymphs or lice there. And it's time consuming. It can be expensive and it's not protective in any way. So what this means is nits can be effectively ignored. Dr. Pollack did talk about some of the, excuse me, I'm sorry, I need to back up for a second. So the components of this lice policy, after we've identified this and after the parent has provided treatment, is have the child come back in for the nurse to check. This provides a further opportunity for education after the parent is calmed down. Should they be excused if they haven't been treated or if they still have lice? Well, my policy includes that I have the option to exclude if the parent has not making an effort. But if they aren't making an effort, there's no reason for them to be excluded because the risk is so limited. I've had to use this hammer of excluding the child or potentially excluding the child twice in the last 5 years, and I never did actually exclude. I just threatened the parent because that was a long-term, there was long-term evidence of not taking action. And it's not that the lice was problematic to the school, it was problematic to the child because the child was very uncomfortable. So the nurse is a good idea to recheck in a week and to encourage the school, encourage the parents to check daily for a month and then once a week during elementary years. One thing I wanted to mention about a better choice for lice letters home is to give general letters at the beginning of the school year, maybe in the middle of the school year and towards the end of school year. We see more lice at those times, not because it's being transmitted in school, but because the children are in school, which allows us to get a good look at them. And they've come back in from recreation periods or times when they've been with family, a lot of times spending the night because of holidays. They've slept over at places, people's houses that they normally wouldn't do, and now they've come back to school. So the last thing that I want to talk about is successful policy change. Remembering that we need to clarify myths and addressing those fears. That's the key to acceptance of the new evidence-based policy. We want to get our ducks in a row. We want to prepare the board in advance. We don't want to blindside them. We want to teach teachers and administrators and start well in advance if you can and use baby steps. Let the administration know what's coming and give them time to get used to the idea. And start with your most fearful teacher or administrator in your re-education process. Ask them, what are you most afraid of? And answer that question, reinforce that, and then move on to others. We need to educate the community, and we need to continuously re-educate the community because you always have new parents who have not been exposed and maybe are familiar with the exclusions of the past. So we always have to reteach this. You're never done with this process. Be prepared for panic, but hopefully you won't have it. So to summarize, the goals of pediculosis management in schools are to educate parents and community. Number one, to identify, confirm, and contain the infestation. To prevent overexposure of chemicals. To maintain confidentiality and privacy. To reduce stigma. To minimize school absence. One of the primary goals of a school nurse is to keep kids in school. And to advocate for elimination of exclusionary policies and implementing evidence-based policies. I want to remind all the school nurses out there that your job is so much more than finding head lice and excluding students. I want to thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over to our moderator.
Thank you, Deborah, for your added insight into the school head lice problem and providing us all insight in how to proactively develop our own school head lice model policy, which will help us to contend with them when they do arrive in school. Okay. Before moving to the question and answer portion of our program, I have a few brief announcements. First, we invite you to join us for our upcoming webinars as listed above. You can find registration information on our website. And in a day or so, the PDF of today's entire presentation will be posted on our website. That will be followed in a few weeks by an on-demand recording of today's presentation. Everyone who registered for today's webinar will be sent a link to download a certificate of attendance a few hours after the webinar. For some of you, these certificates provide supportive documentation for continuing education credits. And we invite you to subscribe to our school IPM listserv, where you will receive invitations to upcoming webinars, highlights from and links to IPM-related newsletters, and highlights on EPA school IPM activities. Again, please visit our website for more information. Okay, just before we wrap up today's webinar, I'd like to ask you to take a few moments to answer a few short polling questions that will assist us in evaluating the efficacy of this webinar and will guide us in developing and improving future webinar presentations. They will appear on your screen toward the end of the question and answer session. We're now ready to answer your questions. Please type any other questions you have into the question pod now, and any questions we don't get to during our webinar will be posted along with the answers to our webpage. Now, for the first question. Okay, for Dr. Pollack, can head lice transfer through combs, brushes, and helmets by clinging onto loose strands of hair?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, good. I'm back on. Can head lice grasp hair, loose strands of hair? Certainly they can, but that is, I don't see that as being much significance. Loose strands of hair will tend to fall on the floor or elsewhere, and any lice that are attached will soon perish. The vast majority of hairs that fall off of a person's head will, even an infested person, will not have lice attached. So I think in the grand scheme of things, it's not really an important issue.
Okay, for Nicolai, should school nurses be picking out nits or identifying lice or nits only?
You know, actually, Deb and I had a behind-the-scenes conversation on this question, and I'm going to defer to Deb, if that's okay.
Sure. In reality, school nurses have so much on their plate eradicating lice by hand picking out nits and lice, especially when they are not a risk to others. Really doesn't need to be a big piece of what they do. But in the reality is, I've done that before. I have done it when I have had a child that we had great difficulty with parent compliance, and the child was uncomfortable. Since I was looking at the head, I pulled the lice off. Please remember that I have my hands in kids' heads every single day, and I've never gotten lice, which is another indication of that not being a risk. So I don't believe it needs to be part of what the school nurse does on a daily basis, but I wouldn't say that there aren't times where it's just easier to pull out the louse or pull off the lice than it is to seek treatment for it again.
Okay, Dr. Pollack, how long will lice live off the body? How many hours?
Great question. Head lice generally will die within a few hours. A few very hearty ones may survive till the next day. The general rule of thumb is if the child leaves a louse or several lice on the pillowcase in the morning, goes off to school, by the time he or she returns in the afternoon, those lice are almost certainly dead. Any that are still alive are probably so physiologically burdened that even if you put them back on the head, they probably won't feed or survive.
Okay, and also another one, Dr. Pollack, how long does it take to identify the pest once it's submitted to the Identify website?
Well, as I'm sitting at my computer at the moment, the turnaround time is measured in minutes. There have been several cases, actually more, where nurses have submitted these requests electronically and gotten an answer while the child was still sitting there in the office. I do a lot of other things during the day, but I try invariably to get all of them processed by the end of that day. So by the time you wake up in the morning, you'll almost certainly have an answer.
Okay, for Nicolai, where would I find the 80% stats regarding schools still excluding for head lice?
Sure. It just came out from CDC. The results of the School Health Policies and Practice Study for 2014. And when you download, and we can send out the link to the SHIP study. It's on table 4.16 when you do download the document.
Okay, thank you. And another question, can head lice be acquired from sleeping in a bed and sharing a bed of an infested person?
I think Dr. Pollack has been, and Deb have talked about how increase in head lice occurs when children have been back in the community, possibly spending the night, possibly a Girl Scout camp, possibly at a grandparent's house. So the possibility of sharing a bed if somebody is infested head lice is transmitted head to head.
Great. Deborah, are you advocating notifying the teacher only with live lice and nits close to the scalp? And please explain.
I actually don't notify the teacher at all. There's a rare occasion when I may notify the teacher, but over the last few years, that has become that they don't even expect to be notified. Since lice are not transmitted in classrooms except on an incredibly rare basis, there isn't any reason for me to notify them.
Okay. For Dr. Pollack, let's see, the recommendation to use a conditioner is counter to the CDC recommendation to avoid any lubricant as it may prevent the pediculicide. Can you discuss that?
Sure. Well, the role of using a conditioner or some other lubricant just is merely to aid in getting the comb to slide through the hair. But that can be washed out. The main reason why there might be some sort of contraindication is that with those products that contain permethrin, the synthetic form of the chrysanthemum extract, there's a little bit of residue that is left on the hair after treating. And that actually is enough residue that it can continue to affect lice for a day or perhaps several thereafter. And so if you have a conditioner on there, it might either cover up the active ingredient or it might prevent it from working. So yeah, there's some difficulties there. In the grand scheme of things, though, the amount of residue that would be left would be so minor that I don't see that it would really have an important part of this equation to consider.
Thank you. I have another question here. Are there any home remedies that are effective in treating lice and nits versus using pesticides? Somebody mentions that they currently use coconut shampoo and conditioner and green tea shampoo. What's your advice on that?
Well, there are all sorts of things. There are uncounted numbers of formulations and products that have never been tested for efficacy or safety. So I can't say whether they work or not for the most part. Perhaps some of them do, but if you're going to apply a product to eliminate lice, why not choose one that has demonstrated efficacy and safety and that you can be sure of? Just because something is labeled as a pesticide doesn't mean it presents any measurable harm to a person. All of these products are meant to provide more benefit than risk when used appropriately.
Great. I have a question for Nicolee and or Deborah. Should summer camps abandon head lice screening of children who come to camp?
This is Debbie, and for the reason I'm going to say in just a second, I'm going to refer this back to Dr. Pollack. Summer camp is a different environment than a school situation. And anytime there is a situation where you are spending the night and there's a long enough period of time that heads are close together that one could crawl to the other one, that's going to increase the potential. On the other hand, if this is a typical summer camp where you have children that are on different bunks and they're not laying right next to each other, I see no reason for there to be an increase of risk among those children. Dr. Pollack, would you have anything different?
Well, I have been called into several summer camps. Some are residential, some are just day camps, because of presumed outbreaks. I've never seen an outbreak in a camp, so I can't say it doesn't happen. So I don't see that the policy for a camp should be any different from that of a school, but I will revise my thoughts if I actually saw some data to the contrary.
And I would not recommend. I would also not recommend a screening as an initial thing going into the camp. I don't see that as being appropriate.
Dr. Pollack, I have another question here. Where do head lice originate? It says, I get this question by child care providers quite a bit.
Oh, they most likely simply evolved along with us. Our ancestors, well, our ancestors had lice and did theirs before them, and they've just been circulating amongst a small fraction of the population. So we've always had them as long as we've had head hair.
Okay. I have another really good question here. Have you seen any increase in the incidence of lice among older children because of the popularity of taking selfies head-to-head with friends?
I've seen an incredible outbreak of stories in the media of that, but I have seen absolutely no basis whatsoever that this is a real phenomenon. I think it's something just to laugh about.
Okay. Can anyone on the panel comment on types of hair that head lice prefer, if any? Different people have different types of hair.
Well, I'll give it a shot. I think all that's necessary is that the hair is long enough for a louse to grasp. I've seen head lice on hair of every imaginable color, including hair that's been dyed pink and green and blue. I've seen them on hair from persons of any race and ethnic type. The only real difference, at least here in the U.S. and elsewhere in North America, might be that having to do with the prevalence by race. For whatever reason, for every active case that we've seen on a black child, whether that be an African American child or a child child who came from overseas and happens to be black, for every one of those cases, we see about 9 cases on kids of all other groups. There are lots of theories as to why that may be. The answer is we don't know, but I guess the take-home message is that everyone with head hair could get head lice.
Okay, and following along that, one last question. Is it true that dirty or greasy hair is less likely to become infested because lice cannot grasp onto the hair as easily?
If the hair really is that encumbered with grease, with Vaseline, with pomades, other things, yeah, it would not be a good substrate for lice to grasp or even to survive on. But in terms of cleanliness, it really makes no difference. I've seen just as many lice on kids who wash their hair every day as on kids who probably do it once a month or maybe once every 3 months.
Okay, well, thank you again to all of our learned presenters, Dr. Richard Pollack, Nicole Bobo, and Deborah Pontias, for your insight and guidance on head lice in schools. And thank you to you, our great audience, for participating in this webinar as part of the EPA School IPM webinar series. Thank you again, and goodbye.
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 5 minutes.